A sharp knock rattled my front door just after sunset. Then another. And another. I opened it expecting a delivery driver or maybe a neighbor. Instead, I found the last two people I ever expected to see standing on my porch. My parents. 19 years had passed since they'd looked me in the eye. My mother smiled as though she'd arrived for a holiday dinner. My father crossed his arms and looked past me into the house. "Well," he said, "are you going to invite us in, or are you planning to keep our granddaughter hidden forever?" The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I was angry. Because they still believed she existed. "I don't think this is a good idea," I said quietly. My mother's smile disappeared. "We've waited long enough. Whatever happened between us happened years ago. You can't punish an innocent child because you're still upset." My father stepped closer before I could answer. "We're her grandparents," he said firmly. "We have a right to meet her." His voice was loud enough that the woman watering flowers across the street looked over. Within seconds, I realized this wasn't a private visit. They expected an audience. I looked from my father to my mother, then back again. Neither of them had come to ask how I'd been. Neither had apologized. They had come for someone else. And they had no idea what they were really asking for. I kept one hand on the edge of the door to steady myself. Neither of my parents looked older in the way I'd imagined over the years. They looked comfortable, confident, certain that time had erased everything they'd done. My mother glanced around my front yard with obvious approval. "So this is where you've been living," she said. "You've done well for yourself." It wasn't a compliment. It sounded more like an inspection. "I built this life myself," I replied. My father ignored that completely. "So where is she?" he asked. 19 years old now, right? College, working. Bring her out, we don't want to waste any more time." There it was again. Not one question about me. Only demands. I stared at them, searching their faces for even the smallest sign that they understood why I had disappeared from their lives. There was nothing. Instead, my mother folded her hands together, as though she were making a generous offer. "We're ready to move on," she said. "Families make mistakes, enough time has passed." Before I could answer, another neighbor slowed to watch from the sidewalk. Then a passing couple. The conversation was no longer ours alone. My father raised his voice deliberately. "We're only here because our daughter refuses to let us meet our own granddaughter." I saw confused expressions forming on the faces nearby. Exactly what my parents wanted. They had already decided who the victims were. I felt something tighten in my chest, not rage but disbelief. 19 years. Not one birthday card. Not one phone call. Not one attempt to find me. And now they stood on my porch acting as though I had kept a happy little family hidden from them. I looked at both of them for a long moment before finally speaking. Barely above a whisper, I asked, "You still don't know what happened, do you?" Neither of them answered my question. Instead, my father frowned as if I were trying to avoid the conversation. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asked. I looked past them for a moment, my mind pulled backward 19 years to the day everything changed. I was 16, sitting at our kitchen table with trembling hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. My parents watched me impatiently as I struggled to find the words. "I'm pregnant." The silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then my mother stood so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. "What did you just say?" When I repeated myself, her face hardened. My father slammed his hand onto the table. "You've embarrassed this family." I tried to explain that I was scared and didn't know what to do, hoping one of them would ask if I was okay. Neither did. Instead, they argued about what the neighbors would think, what relatives would say, and how their reputation would be ruined. Every sentence was about them. "I need your help," I whispered. "You should have thought about that earlier," my father replied. Within hours, they stuffed my clothes into black trash bags and placed them by the front door. My mother wouldn't even look at me. You are not bringing this shame into our home, she said. I stood on the porch crying, clutching those bags, waiting for one of them to change their mind. The door closed. The lock clicked. That was the last sound I heard from my family. The days that followed blurred together. Temporary shelters, borrowed couches, doctor's appointments I attended alone, and endless nights wondering if my parents would call. Every time my phone rang, I hoped it was them. It never was. Not once in all those months did they ask whether I was safe. Not once did they ask how the baby was doing. The memory faded, and I found myself standing on my front porch again, facing the same two people who now spoke as though we'd merely had a family disagreement. They hadn't forgotten what they'd done. They had rewritten it. I met my father's eyes and spoke with a calm that surprised even me. If you think I've been hiding your granddaughter... I paused. You've been wrong for 19 years. The words hung in the air. No one spoke for several seconds. Then my father gave a short, dismissive laugh. There you go again, he said, always making everything dramatic. By now, several neighbors had stopped to watch. A woman from 2 houses down whispered to her husband. Across the street, a teenage boy paused while walking his dog, clearly curious about the growing crowd. Before I could respond, another familiar voice called out. What's going on here? I turned to see my Aunt Denise walking up the sidewalk. Behind her were 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years. My mother immediately stepped toward them. We're just trying to meet our granddaughter, she announced loudly. Eliana refuses to let us see her. Aunt Denise looked at me with confusion. Is that true? I didn't answer. Not yet. My silence seemed to confirm the story my parents had already been telling. My father sighed dramatically. We've made mistakes, he said, but she's punishing an innocent young woman by keeping her away from us. My cousin folded his arms. 19 years is a long time, he said to me. Maybe it's time to let them meet her. The pressure settled over me from every direction. No one there knew the whole story. Then my mother revealed something I hadn't expected. We've been trying for weeks, she said. Once your cousin finally gave us your address, we came as soon as we could. So that was how they'd found me. Not because they'd searched all these years. Because someone had handed them my address after nearly 2 decades. Aunt Denise looked at my father. How old is your granddaughter now? 19, he answered immediately. She's probably in college. What does she study? Another relative asked. He hesitated. Eyes welled. Where does she live? Someone else asked. Another pause. My mother stepped in. She's always been secretive. Eliana never tells us anything. I finally spoke. You've never asked. The crowd grew quieter. A neighbor frowned. Wait, she said, if they threw you out when you were 16, why didn't either of them ever check on you? Neither of my parents answered. Instead, my father pointed at me. She's trying to turn everyone against us. But the certainty in his voice was gone. The questions had begun. Without another word, I turned, walked back into my house and disappeared down the hallway. When I returned a moment later, I was holding a worn, sealed envelope. I'd kept it for 19 years. And for the first time, I was ready to let someone else see what was inside. The conversations stopped the moment people saw the envelope in my hands. It wasn't large. The edges were worn soft from years of being handled, then tucked away again. The paper had yellowed with age, but I had kept it sealed inside a protective folder for nearly 2 decades. My father frowned. What is that? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked around at the faces gathered outside my house, neighbors, relatives, strangers who had only wandered over because of the raised voices. Then I looked back at my parents. This, I said quietly, lifting the envelope, contains the last documents connected to my pregnancy. For the first time since arriving, my mother's confidence faltered. She glanced at my father before forcing a smile. Eliana, there's no reason to make a scene. A scene, I repeated. You came to my home demanding to meet someone you've never even asked about. My father took a step forward. Put the papers away, we can discuss this privately. No, I replied. You wanted everyone to hear your version, they deserve to hear mine. The crowd remained silent. No one interrupted. I drew a slow breath. 19 years, I said. Not once did either of you call to ask if I gave birth safely. Neither of them spoke. You never asked if I had a healthy baby. Silence. You never asked whether I survived. Aunt Denise slowly turned toward my parents. Is that true? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father looked down at the sidewalk. Someone in the crowd whispered, I assumed they knew. So did I, another neighbor replied. I carefully opened the envelope and removed several folded documents. The hospital logo was visible at the top of the first page. Behind it was a simple card, its edges faded with time. I've kept these because they were all I had left, I said. My father stared at the paperwork, confusion giving way to unease. What are those? They're from the hospital, I answered, holding them tightly. And this? I lifted the second item. It is a condolence card. No one spoke. The words seemed to drain the air from the street. My parents looked at each other, as if neither understood what they were seeing. Then my father's eyes landed on the hospital date. His face lost every trace of color. That date, he whispered. He looked back at me, unable to finish the sentence. My father kept staring at the date on the hospital paperwork, as though looking at it long enough would somehow change what it meant. My mother's voice trembled. Eliana. I unfolded the first document completely. This was the day everything ended. No one interrupted. After 19 years, everyone was finally listening. I didn't keep a daughter hidden from you, I said. There was never a granddaughter for you to meet. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I continued before either of them could speak. After you threw me out, I stayed wherever I could. Shelters, spare rooms, cheap motels when I had enough money. I kept going to my medical appointments alone because there was no one else. I looked directly at my parents. The complications happened before I could ever bring my baby home. The silence was overwhelming. The pregnancy didn't survive. A tear rolled down my mother's cheek. No, she whispered. I nodded once. There was no family sitting beside my hospital bed, no parents asking if I was okay, no one waiting outside my room. I held up the faded card. This condolence card didn't come from either of you. I paused. It came from a hospital social worker who realized I had no one. Several people in the crowd lowered their eyes. Others looked at my parents. You never called, I said quietly, not once. My father finally found his voice. We didn't know. Exactly. The single word stopped him. You didn't know because you never cared enough to ask. His shoulders sagged. For the first time in my life, I saw him without an answer. You threw me out believing I had disgraced the family, I continued. Then you spent 19 years telling everyone I chose to leave. Aunt Denise slowly turned toward my parents. Is that true? Neither of them denied it. Another relative spoke up. You let all of us believe she'd cut you off for no reason. Someone else added, you never told us you forced a pregnant 16-year-old out of the house. My mother began crying openly. I was ashamed, she admitted. You were ashamed, I repeated softly, so you erased me. She tried to step toward me. I'm sorry, I can't imagine what you went through. You don't have to imagine it, I replied. You created it. She froze. My father looked as though he wanted to say something, anything, but every explanation died before it reached his lips. The truth was too simple. They had chosen their reputation over their daughter. The crowd slowly drifted from sympathy to disappointment. Conversations began in quiet voices. I can't believe they never checked on her. All these years. She went through that alone. No one defended my parents anymore. The story they had repeated for nearly 2 decades had fallen apart in a matter of minutes. Over the following months, the consequences spread through the family. Relatives who had once accepted my parents' version of events stopped inviting them to gatherings. People who had admired them questioned everything they claimed. The respect they had worked so hard to protect disappeared because the truth had finally replaced the story they had told. As for me, I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. For years, I'd carried the weight of a question no one had bothered to ask. Now everyone knew the answer. My mother wrote letters that I never opened. My father called several times before finally stopping. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted revenge. Because there was nothing left to rebuild. The family I needed had been the friends who stood beside me through the years, the people who never asked me to hide my past or pretend it hadn't happened. They became the home I had been denied at 16. The hospital papers remained in a small wooden box inside my house. Not because I wanted to relive the worst day of my life, but because they reminded me that the truth never disappears forever. Sometimes it simply waits until someone is finally willing to hear it. My parents had come to my door expecting to meet a granddaughter. Instead, they were forced to meet the consequences of the choice they made 19 years earlier. And when they walked away, they finally understood that they had never been denied a relationship with their granddaughter. They had abandoned both mother and child long before they ever knew the outcome. That was something no apology could undo. And for the first time since I was 16, I closed my front door knowing I no longer needed anything from the people standing on the other side of it.